The ocean does not care about courage. A crew that goes down in the North Atlantic in winter has minutes, not hours, minutes. The cold does the rest. And beneath that water, something is hunting. In 1942, German submarines sank more than 1,000 Allied vessels. The math was simple and catastrophic. The only thing that could stop the U-boat was the aircraft. And in 1942, the aircraft that existed for that purpose were barely adequate for the task. By the end of this video, you will understand why the aircraft that won the Battle of the Atlantic never made it into the history books. Why closing a gap in the middle of the ocean changed the entire course of the war. And whether you could have flown 14 hours over empty water, knowing that if something went wrong, there was nothing below you but cold. This is the story of the machines that hunted the hunters, and what it did to the men who flew them. Subscribe. The real story is just beginning. The consolidated PBY Catalina was not a glamorous aircraft. It was slow, brutally, almost offensively slow for a military aircraft operating in a combat environment. Its maximum speed was 196 miles per hour, which meant that any fighter aircraft it encountered could engage it, attack it, and disengage before the Catalina's crew had time to respond effectively. It had a range of over 2,500 miles, which was the point. It could fly for hours over open ocean, searching a grid of water that no surface vessel could cover in the same time. The crews who flew the Catalina understood its limitations completely. They flew it anyway, because the alternative was not flying. And not flying meant the submarines operated undetected. A typical Catalina patrol lasted 12 to 14 hours. 12 to 14 hours over open ocean at low altitude in an aircraft that vibrated constantly, that was cold in winter and suffocating in summer, that offered its crew no comfort and minimal protection. The crew scanned the water below for the thin white line of a periscope wake, for the dark shape of a submarine running on the surface to recharge its batteries, for any anomaly in the endlessly moving surface of the Atlantic. Most patrols found nothing. The crews flew home, filed their reports, slept, and flew again. The ones that found something faced a different problem. A U-boat running on the surface could dive in approximately 30 seconds. The Catalina, at its cruising speed, needed significantly more than 30 seconds to close the distance from visual detection to attack range. The geometry of the problem was brutal. See the submarine, begin the attack run, watch the submarine disappear beneath the surface before the depth charges could be released. Again and again, the crews came home with nothing to report except a position where a submarine had been 30 seconds before they arrived. The solution was not a faster aircraft. It was a different approach, attacking at night, using radar to locate submarines that were running on the surface in what they believed was the safety of darkness, dropping flares to illuminate the target at the last moment before the attack. The Lee Light, a powerful searchlight mounted on the aircraft, allowed crews to transition from radar contact to visual attack in seconds. The submarines that had operated safely in darkness suddenly found that darkness was no longer safe. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was profound. A submarine running on the surface at night had always carried a manageable level of risk. The Lee Light changed that calculation permanently. Crews that had grown accustomed to surfacing at night to recharge batteries now faced the possibility that the darkness above them concealed an aircraft that could find them, illuminate them, and attack them before they could dive. The surface, which had been a place of relative safety, became a place of vulnerability. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was not designed for anti-submarine warfare. It was designed to fly in formation at high altitude, to absorb punishment from enemy fighters in flak, and to deliver bombs with precision against industrial targets deep inside enemy territory. Its transfer to maritime patrol duties in the early years of the war was a measure of desperation. The aircraft that existed specifically for anti-submarine work were insufficient in number, and something had to fill the gap. The B-17 crews who flew anti-submarine patrols in 1942 flew an aircraft optimized for a completely different mission, over an environment their training had not prepared them for, against a threat that their aircraft systems were not designed to detect or engage. They adapted. They learned the patterns of submarine behavior, the conditions under which a U-boat was most likely to be found on the surface, the approaches that gave the best chance of an attack before the submarine could dive. The results were mixed. The B-17 was not an effective anti-submarine platform, but it was present, and presence mattered. A submarine commander who knew that B-17s were operating in his area of operation was a submarine commander who spent more time submerged, who was more cautious about surfacing, who was less aggressive in pursuing convoys. The psychological pressure of aerial surveillance, even surveillance that was technically inadequate, changed behavior. The consolidated B-24 Liberator was a different matter. Its exceptional range, greater than any other American bomber of the war, made it the aircraft that finally closed the Atlantic Gap. The Atlantic Gap was the area of the central Atlantic that land-based aircraft could not reach from either side of the ocean. It was the area where the submarines operated with complete impunity, where convoy after convoy was attacked without air cover, where the losses were worst and the crews most alone. The very long-range variant of the B-24, modified to carry additional fuel at the expense of some of its defensive armament, could reach the Atlantic Gap from bases in Iceland and the Azores. When it appeared over the central Atlantic in 1943, the calculation changed permanently. There was no longer any area of the Atlantic where a submarine could operate with the certainty of air cover absence. The gap was closed. The B-24 crews who flew these missions flew at the absolute edge of their aircraft's range. A mechanical problem over the central Atlantic was not a situation from which rescue was likely. The water below them was deep and cold, and the distances involved made surface rescue extremely difficult. They flew knowing this. They flew because the alternative was leaving the convoys unprotected in the one area where protection was most needed. The short Sunderland was the Royal Air Force's primary maritime patrol flying boat, and it carried a reputation among German submarine crews that went beyond its technical capabilities. U-boat crews who encountered a Sunderland on the surface had learned that the aircraft was heavily armed, more heavily armed than any other patrol aircraft they might encounter, and that its crew would fight back. Several U-boats that attempted to fight it out on the surface rather than dive discovered that the Sunderland's defensive armament could inflict serious damage. The aircraft acquired the nickname, among German crews, of the Flying Porcupine. The psychological dimension of that nickname mattered. A submarine crew that saw a Sunderland approaching faced a choice: dive immediately and attempt to escape, or remain on the surface and fight. The knowledge that the Sunderland would fight back, that it was not simply a target to be engaged, but an adversary capable of inflicting serious damage, made the choice more complicated. Hesitation cost time. Time cost the possibility of a clean escape. The Avro Lancaster operated in anti-submarine roles with Coastal Command, carrying the enormous 5,000-pound Mark 24 homing torpedo, a weapon that could track a submerged submarine by its acoustic signature. The development of acoustic homing weapons changed the fundamental nature of the anti-submarine campaign. A submarine that dived was no longer safe. The depth charge required the attacking aircraft to know approximately where the submarine was and to attack that position. The acoustic torpedo required only that the submarine be making noise, and a submarine running its motors was always making noise. U-boat crews who understood what the acoustic torpedo meant understood that diving was no longer the guaranteed escape it had once been. The water that had protected them now potentially contained a weapon that was looking for them. The psychological impact of that knowledge, that the ocean itself had become hostile in a new way, was significant. The Lockheed Hudson served with Coastal Command from the first days of the war, flying patrols over the North Sea and the Atlantic before more capable aircraft were available in sufficient numbers. It was the Hudson that made the first successful attacks on German submarines in British waters in 1939 and 1940, establishing the pattern of aerial anti-submarine warfare that would develop over the following years. The Hudson crews flew in conditions that later generations of aviators would find difficult to understand. Navigation over open ocean in 1940 without radar, without GPS, with only dead reckoning and celestial navigation, in conditions that frequently made celestial observation impossible, was an exercise in applied mathematics and professional judgment. Crews that miscalculated their position ran out of fuel over open water. Crews that flew in deteriorating weather conditions encountered conditions their aircraft could not always survive. The attrition from operational accidents and navigational errors was significant. Losses that never appeared in the statistics of anti-submarine warfare, but were as real as any combat loss. By 1943, the combination of long-range aircraft, improved radar, acoustic weapons, and coordinated convoy escort had turned the Battle of the Atlantic. The submarines that had once operated with relative impunity now faced an adversary that could find them day or night, that could attack them whether they were on the surface or submerged, that could coordinate with surface vessels to prosecute a contact until the submarine was destroyed or its crew was exhausted. The men who flew the patrols that made this possible flew thousands of hours over empty ocean, found hundreds of submarines, attacked dozens, and sank enough to change the strategic balance of the war. Most of their patrols found nothing. The ones that found something lasted only seconds at the moment of decision. The long approach, the attack run, the release, and then the wait to see what the water would reveal. They flew over an ocean that gave nothing back. They flew, knowing that if something went wrong, the water below them was the last thing they would see. They flew because the convoys needed cover, and cover required aircraft, and aircraft required crews willing to fly. The Battle of the Atlantic was won in the air, not by glamorous fighter aces or precision bombing raids, but by crews in slow, cold, noisy aircraft flying patrol after patrol over empty water, looking for a thin white line on the surface of the sea. Most days, they found nothing. On the days they found something, they changed the war.